Can I call this meeting to order, please? Well, I know this is the sort of graveyard session immediately after lunch, so if you could work on keeping your energy up. I'll only speak for a second or two, so you won't have any danger of falling asleep when I speak. And my colleagues and friends here will, I think, speak with a lot more interesting and dynamically in order to keep you awake. So we'll do our best. If you could stick with us, that's great. My name's Aidan McQuaid. I'm Director of Anti-Slavery International. I think most of you will be aware of why Anti-Slavery International is interested in this issue of caste. It's something that Professor Thorat pointed out this morning, that most of those who are enslaved across the subcontinent of India, Pakistan, Nepal, Bangladesh are from the Dalit and Adivasi communities. So there's this interrelationship between caste and slavery, which we see as a deeply embedded problem across the region. In fact, it was something which was highlighted in press reports over the past week or so, where it was announced or it was reported that in Uttar Pradesh, the gang rape of 2 young women had been ordered in order to punish a young man for eloping with a higher caste woman. Something which has been discussed and described in detail by some other speakers this morning. Now, Amnesty helped bring that case to wider attention and has been running a significant campaign on that. But I was struck when I was looking at that campaign, the word Dalit was never mentioned once. And there was only, it seemed to me, a glancing understanding of what the issue of caste was, aside from the issue or intersecting with the issue of gender in that issue. Part of the reason that we thought this conference was important was because the issue of caste has been overlooked and continues to be overlooked again and again by too many development organisations, and it's clearly impossible, as our speakers this morning have described, to hope to come to any resolution of the issue of poverty, resolution of the issue of slavery, until the issue of caste is understood and properly incorporated into programming, planning, policy work going forward. It is probably not a unique development problem in history, in that it is a new manifestation of a form of apartheid, where human rights abuse comes to underpin and dominate social and economic development of a wide swathe of society. But unfortunately, despite the fact that this issue addresses hundreds of millions more people than apartheid ever did, it's still something which we seem as a society, as a world community of human beings, to be happy to leave in the shadows. But the speakers today are going to begin to describe some means and some approaches by which the issue of caste can be begun to be addressed within the context of the work that they've been doing. So without any further ado, I'd like to ask for my first speaker to take the podium, who's Prakash Louis, who is a researcher and activist, more than 2 decades experience as a social and human rights activist, and involved in action and research to uphold the rights of Dalits and Adivasis across South Asia. So, Prakash.
If this is the graveyard session, I hope I won't contribute into that. Hence, I'm using PowerPoint. And in our country, when you want to empower people, use PowerPoint, they say. So I've done it to empower ourselves during this time. So having stated that, that's the issue that we want to look at this time. And the whole pre-lunch session was to look at the caste, the discrimination of the Dalits outside. Now is to look within and see if the Dalits have decided, strongly decided, and opted to move towards education, employment, empowerment on their own merit, how do we accompany them? And accompaniment in terms of serious thinking about the state of life, which was done this morning and yesterday evening, and now what is the program of action is something that I would like to. This was very clearly spelled out. I don't And that's where the principle of caste in everyday practice began to be seen and operated. And India, progress, development, business talked in the morning session. And that is the development. From a person pouring water, an untouchable cannot have the same vessel to drink water. It moved into the 2-tumbler system. That's the development this country has gone. And you know, witness to that, you are talking. And this is something Ashif Bhai will deal at greater length. I wouldn't. That continues. Irrespective of 70 years of planned development, irrespective of 60 years of poverty alleviation program, in which, I'm sorry to state, even the international development agencies were party to it. And hence to relook and see what is actually to be done. A change and a changing India, and within that the role, discrimination and assertion, exclusion and inclusion, development and underdevelopment, non-literate and educated, caste occupations and diversification, job seekers and providers, beneficiaries and development agencies, and finally, objects and subjects. For the Dalits of India, it is not this or that, but for us, it is this and that. And that is where, while change is a reality, continued discrimination, exclusion, marginalisation, exploitation, oppression is a reality which the developmental agencies need to look at. So the response has to be critical. It cannot be one time. It cannot be doing poverty alleviation anymore, addressing the issue of the poor. It has to be focused. When I say focus, Dalit children should be the priority, Dalit adolescent girls should be the priority, Dalit women should be the priority, Dalit community should be the priority. Anything else done would contribute in continuance of the discrimination of the caste system that this country boasts about in the present regime. And it has to be multiple, not this or that, but and also comprehensive. Group of people from the rat-eating community from Bihar, 2008, waiting for relief for the whole day. Anand and myself have been witness to that whole day, waited for relief and went back home without a grain of wheat. And that is what this development in this country, that is the business that we are talking about, this country is engaged in, waiting for relief. And today we all are working in India, right to relief. Not only right to resources, right to relief for a group of people who have been dispossessed over the years. And for this serious examination of the scenario, the situation I think it's an attempt to wake us all up. Okay. So who is missing and who is excluded? It's important to do that. A group of people waiting for relief go back home without anything. That group of people are missing even in relief in emergency situation. And number two, doing vulnerability and exclusion analysis. Without that, no development agencies should set foot in India. Otherwise, we contribute to this, the whole caste system. Providing opportunity for education, employment and empowerment. This is what the Dalits have decided for their own liberation. And to be to accompany in this process. Control over resources and increasing the competencies so that they decide who they are, what they are. So, need to look at our own examination in the line of Dalit Development Index, or what some of us are working today in terms of Dalit Discrimination Index. And that counterpose it with all the human development index that the Indian government, Indian state brings up, or other international agencies bring out. I think the contrast should be very clear. The Dalit Discrimination Index, and moving from that, what I have not here, is Dalit Dignity Index. Is there any bit of dignity from all that we heard from morning? The children, the adolescent girls, the women. I think this is the development. And for a group of people where the Indian development. So some of the responses is to look at the attitudinal and structural change. Many keep arguing in India, and many from outside, once there is a mindset change, attitudinal change, things will be better. but attitudinal change is only one aspect of human life. If an attitudinal change does not accompany with a structural change, the attitudinal test does not stand the test of the ground. And just take these conferences. It's because of the Dalit men and women come and speak here, because in the structural change that was progressively being introduced, they were party to it. And hence, they can speak a language which the community wants to speak and contribute. And as subjects, not as objects of change. So both attitudinal change and structural change. Let me give a case study from DFID. In 2003, Professor Thorat, myself and many others were called by DFID to look at the exclusion the Dalits, Adivasis and the Muslims and the women in India go through. And we did research, worked out papers and submitted. And the outcome was Partnership for Development, Social Inclusion Strategy, which became the country plan in India 2003 and 2008. Based on that, two other interventions by the DFID, which till 2003 never looked at these issues, looked at poverty alleviation, looked at power, looked at alternative energy for India and so on. First time beginning to see, and the outcome was what was known as the PACS program, Poorest area civil society program, taking poverty as an issue, poverty eradication as a response, and looking at that. But some of us were party in the board, and we moved this looking at from poor into exclusion as an issue. And PACS 2 looked at, which Anand will elaborately discuss, access to sustainable livelihood for the discriminated and excluded communities. And number 2, rights to basic services at the level of these excluded. An additional program to that was the IPAP program, International Partners program, to strengthen the civil societies, especially civil societies from the excluded Dalit, tribal and minority communities, so that they respond to the issues of their own communities. And that is a huge shift that took place in DFID. But I am afraid the present Prime Minister of your country has agreed to shelve that program also, which began to make some inroads into this undeniable caste system, which cannot be tackled at length. So,
okay, Ashif, 2 minutes left.
Just two. Okay. So then also inclusion cannot be passive. It has to be a proactive inclusion in terms of understanding, also in terms of strategizing. The paper is there at length. I would like to, this is something very, very important. It's an appeal that we would like to make. Set up, support, and strengthen Dalit organizations. I can number many of them, just few: NCDHR, IIDS, Dalit Foundation, National Dalit Foundation, and so on. Many others spoke about the Dalits. But from the time these organizations were set up and were strengthened, they began to speak a language which came from the pain, the agony, and the trauma the community has been going through. Then equal employment opportunity, and another case study that I want to give. It is Christian Aid in India, which for the first time opted to look at exclusion and not outside, within their organization. And Christian Aid is the first, out of the 7 UK-based organizations, the first one who appointed a Dalit as the country director. And I think this is a credibility to the Christian Aid. But I would also say that it cannot be expected from any of the NGOs, INGOs, UN agencies in India. And that is where you can exert pressure. But then Christian Aid did, and the candidate was not, because of quota or reservation, or as we call in Hindi, Sarkari Mehman, on his own credit, this person was appointed. So DNS, IDS, and all these, I think it is time for DSN, IDSN to look at, instead of getting routinized, is it time to assess last 20 years of contribution and see what could be something focused, what could be something directed, what could be something that could be prioritized, so that global intervention in the liberation of the Dalits would be also kind of looked at. And continuous internationalizing the issue of exclusion and the discrimination of Dalits. It is in 2001 during the Durban conference, for the first time in the UN, over 200 of us, Dalits and friends of Dalits, raised the issue of the caste, raised the issue of Dalit discrimination. Till that time, all the Indian officials who vociferously spoke against apartheid never said a word about Dalits and the tribals and the minorities in the international forum. It is for the first time, and the contribution, I should acknowledge, comes from lots of development agencies and NGOs. But that cannot stop there. It needs to be done in the UN, it needs to be done in Geneva, it needs to be done in the European Union. Don't stop there. In Delhi, also in all the states. Since you are a stakeholder in it, UK can play a huge role. DFID gave about 2,000 million Indian rupees to Bihar government for administrative reform mission. What did the government do? They repaired all the secretariat, their offices, made it air conditioned, never did any kind of reform. I think what we are asking for is something more deeper. And lastly, and centrally, this has to be planned out. It cannot be one-time issue. It has to be looked at. Looking at Jal, Jungle, Jameen and Jameer. All the resources and the dignity of the Dalits. The ownership, access and control over this. As long as Dalits do not have, and if they continue to depend upon their own oppressors and exploiters, the life of the Dalits, like Dalit children, adolescent girls, Dalit women will continue to be there. We can only pity the situation, but we can't remedy. I think it is in this line, we would like to look at and appeal to you, see the broader picture within that, prioritize and also make focus and directed intervention so that the struggles of the Dalits to be subjects to determine their own life, their dignity, their resources, you will be a very good partner in that. And thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Prakash. You took 12 minutes, the agreed 10, so not bad. But we're going to have a prize for the person who can come closest to the 10-minute mark. So Anand's up for the prize now, who is Director of Poorest Areas Civil Society Programme, which is a DFID flagship programme. They still have DFID flagship programmes in India. Yeah. That is aiming to ensure access to rights and entitlement for socially excluded groups. So, Anand, please.
Friends, I will try to keep you wake up. And at the same time, I would like to congratulate the SOAS Institute and David for his contribution for bringing this discourse. At least in a lighter vein within the Dalit circles, we used to say the British Empire struggled 400 years to understand what the caste means. But some of this, I'm glad to see that discourse again happening here, at the right, at the center. And this needs to be unpacked further. And I'm sure this concept is only a beginning of a long innings, how it will take us forward. And not so much of just bringing the Dalits out of the shadow, but there are the people who believes and practice caste are in the darkness. Maybe perhaps the next theme should be bringing people out of the darkness, where at least the Dalits can come out of the shadow and articulate what this means. And it's a privilege for me to just to be there and share about, with a humble voice, what does it mean leading a Christian aid, an INGO, and working on these issues, working in partnership with the civil society organizations, and try to do the journey. So it looked a little bit of a sermonized. Excuse me for that. But quite often, when you lead an INGO, UK-based INGO, you need to be politically correct what you say and what you don't say. And being a Christian and being an aid and talking about the caste always seems to be quite sensitive. So I try to read in between, but certainly I try to see what this journey means to us while working in partnership with the civil society organization. I can't say this is our success, but I think it's a humble contribution and our ability and our opportunity to work with the organizations led by this excluded community to define what their destiny is. So this photograph, I think Ashif Bhai is going to elaborate further. A Dalit woman doing a manual scavenging work and how she's being looked after by the general caste woman. But before I move, there are certain political correct statements I need to make. It's my responsibility to do that. So certainly the one point I want to make is that discrimination is a universal issue. Many nations continuing one form of the other kind of a discrimination, and it's contributing to the growing inequalities. And in Indian context, not only in Indian, in South Asian context, the caste, or to an extent in the UN language, the work and descent-based discrimination is a global problem. It's no longer belong to a one country. It is affecting more than 300 millions. To an extent, the numbers varies. But you have the Buraku communities in Japan, Ozu communities in Africa, the Quilombo communities in Brazil. They also come under a similar form of analogous form of caste-based discrimination. So therefore, no longer we could see this from an India prism, even though it has originated, but certainly it is a global phenomenon affecting several millions of people. So therefore, it is a very important issue. But it's much more complex for the reasons mentioned by several of our people. And second time, when now this issue of caste comes, it becomes very, very sensitive. Why are we talking and what is the hidden agenda? And even yesterday event, when I was there, somebody asking, is it the colonial agenda left for the Dalits to deal with or the Indians to deal with? It's not the issue. I would like to bring the extract from the enactment made by the Parliament in 2013, especially the second part, where it acknowledged the iniquitous caste system. And this is an act made by the Parliament, approved the act. So I'm just reading from that. And it talks about it still persists in various parts of the country, and the existing laws have not been proved adequate in eliminating, of course, in the context of the manual scavenging. The second part of the last part of the preamble of this act also talks about it is necessary to correct the historical injustice and the indignity meted out. So therefore, I think this talks why every human being, every organization who are concerned on the issues of dignity and social justice need to talk about it. Of course, many speakers have pointed out, constitutionally this is abolished, but the problem, that the issue is, it is there everywhere. And though it is rooted in the Hindu religion systems, but now you have the identity of Dalit Christians, Dalit Muslims, Dalit Buddhists, Dalit Sikhs. What it points out that the caste has almost entered into all religions, and it assimilated the system and practices. So one form of the discrimination do exist in other religious forms, even though in ideology it doesn't exist. So that's the point I want to make it. And the issue which I'm going to deal is about what kind of rights and entitlements. One of my colleagues, they warned me the entitlements has quite a negative connotation in the UK, where some privileged get the entitlements. Here, the entitlement means by the poor and excluded community, it is the state giving certain social welfare opportunities. So that is in that context, the entitlements I'm talking about are pro-poor social security programs. And here is the picture where women are working under the NREGA program. There are various programs, social welfare programs. To an extent, I would like to acknowledge, India spends almost close to 190,000 crores of rupees annually on various social welfare programs, a significant budget being allocated. But the challenge is how much of these resources are actually reaching to those people who are intended to. That is the way the role for the civil society Krama. Here, various programs are listed. I'm not going to go through that. But the first one, this was about the Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Act, which is passed by the Parliament, which promises 100 days of employment. But most of the issues when we are working, it is not so much about the issue of looking into the entitlements, but the whole process of empowerment. Apart from entitlements, there are certain constitutional rights which is being guaranteed in the Constitution and enacted from time to time. Even Ramesh and Asha, they talked about the Scheduled Caste Scheduled Tribe Prevention Act. And another area which is also even Thoraji did mention about the special component plan, which talking about, even though it doesn't exist across across the nation, but at least the 3 states, you have a provision of a policy which giving a certain percentage of the budget for the welfare of the Dalit and Adivasis. And there was another very good initiative by the government relating to the affirmative action in the public procurement, up to 4%. Unfortunately, the uptake of this entitlement is nil. It's also point out how much of the so-called MSME or the entrepreneurs, they are there. You have an act which is talking about the positive procurement, but there is not much being done there. So these are all the challenges as a civil society, as a development organizations, we confronted with that. So the whole process is how do you unite the communities together and form their own institution which they want to do. As a Christian Aid, we had a privilege of working not only in our core programs, but we are also, like rightly mentioned by Dr. Prakash Louis, about the PACS program, DFID program, is the second phase. Christian Aid, we are managing in collaboration with about 5 other organizations, including Indian Institute of Dalit Studies. So it is one of the flagship programs, certainly quite voluminous. But what it is, this is an important point, is DFID through their policy document, even though it is now being retired, but certainly that program has opened up opportunities to bring focus on the excluded community. But of course, the social exclusion was defined on 5 terms: gender, caste, ethnicity, disability, and the religious minorities. But certainly being the bilateral program recognized the caste-based identity as one form of the social exclusion. So through that program, we try to do some kind of look how we can address these issues of exclusion. I think it's not only just related to the PACS program alone, but whatever the work we do as a Christian Aid in India and South Asia region, we often try to bring a little bit of a focus on this issue. The selection of the civil society organization is quite an important area. There are very well-meaning organizations working for the welfare of the excluded community. But when you look into the second and the third in the line of leadership, you will not find many. Maybe in the lower level, you will find many. But it's equally important to have organizations led by those excluded community where they can articulate what their issues are. So it is important to have the diversity when you work. They may not have the same capacity to do the same level of experimentation, but we try to bring the selection need to be based on an affirmative action where having women-led organizations, Dalit-led organization, Adivasi-led organization brings value to enrich the intervention that we are trying to do and which we try to do deliberately in this program. Similarly, focus on the social excluded community is very important, and the whole focus is it's not so much of issue of entitlements, it's more of non-discriminatory access to the entitlements. So here is an example, Dunga Devi, what she's talking about it. It's no longer I'm looking this issue as a more of an entitlement. It's like, it's my right. I think this is where the people should be able to confidently claim that this is my right and I want to put that. So what does it mean in terms of the change process? Not only just the uptake of these social schemes, but I think what has been there, the experience is, if you consistently work on a long-term basis, you could see a lot of positive results. The example of as early as 2015, under the leadership of the Modi, the amendments have been brought to the Prevention of Atrocities Act, which is a very, very positive. But of course, the challenge is how do we do in the implementation is altogether an area which we need to look. But what we have contributed this program, our intervention, is the leadership development as well as strengthening the human rights defenders, what we call as the Dalit human rights defenders who can do, we contributed into that. But some of the insights, I think, as an INGO, I can talk about it. The most important is many INGOs, or many of us, we feel, it's too sensitive to talk about this issue. Friends, there is no sensitivity at all. It is a hidden apartheid. The first thing as an INGO, a development agency, we need to do is we need to break the silence. Talk about, recognize the problem, articulate, bring the policy, but not the policy alone. Need to put the policy into practices. Quite often, you will always find a very, very important policy document, but certainly how the policy being translated into action is very important. Second issue, people always feel, is it an anti-state? Talking about caste, working with the Dalit, is it seen as an anti-state? I don't think so, because it is the Indian constitution, the state that is trying to protect the rights of the Dalit as a constitutional right. But it is the society in general believes quite opposite to that. So this is a very contradiction in which the society doesn't believe the constitutional values. That is the struggle. If a civil society are working on this issue of addressing this issue of caste-based discrimination, you are with the state. It is assisting or contributing to the process in which the constitution believes. Friends, there is no short journey in this. It's a long-term journey. It requires long-term commitment, both in terms of the resources as well as creating that opportunity. Affirmative action, yes, we may not have a mandatory reservation policy, but having an affirmative action is an important. Institution and the leadership is equally important. It's need to build the institutions. Inclusion as a value chain, we need to put it. I think, and it's not necessarily say that we need to have only all the Dalit organization. The problem of caste is a humanity. It's a problem of everybody. It cannot be left to the Dalits alone to fight. Every person need to join in that. So we need both the Dalit and non-Dalit organization. But the focus is not on a welfarist mode or a need-based approach. Focus on the rights, how they can attain and how they can retain the rights that are enshrined. The important aspect is also the whole issue of engaging and collaboration. Not necessarily we need to work in isolation. There are several civil society organizations, activists, social movements want to work. We need to build that bigger movement. And absolutely, people say, let us be neutral, so it's too sensitive. I think there is no space of neutrality at all. Keep the non-discrimination, whether you work on issue of water, health, nutrition, whatever it may be, bring the non-discrimination as a value chain proposition so that whatever the topics or the thematic areas you're working, you can certainly address this issue. This is an issue of justice. This is an issue of dignity. So it's important. Sometimes your overarching log frames and the value for money debate, how important you need to deliver the programs economically. But the issue of equity is equally important. Reaching out to a Dalit hamlet in a rural Bihar village will cost you more than reaching to a hamlet next to a highway. But therefore, the issue of equity is equally important. We should not be carried away with the economy and efficiency debate, which while respecting that, but we need to bring. I think the whole process is, the focus should be, empowerment is key to that. Finally, I would like to conclude the quote which Dr. B.R. Ambedkar said, the socio-economic transformation in India requires a cultural revolution, one that will not only destroy the culture of the past, but also build something value in its place. I think such a very visionary statement. I think the journey of mine and of my organization is a process to contribute towards that process. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Anand. That was great. But 14 minutes, so you're not getting the prize. So we now have one more person who has got a chance to get the blue ribbon on this. The final speaker is Ashif Shaiklh. Sorry, I can't pronounce your name. I got that bit. Yeah.
Ashif
Shaiklh. There you go. It's easier than I thought. Sincere apologies. Who's going to speak about manual scavenging, please?
Friends, Jai Bhim. Before I will start, I will present a small documentary film about the whole issue of manual scavenging, then I will start.
But one family can never be pure. Behind the temple, Jamna and her husband clean the temple's surroundings. They must also perform the dirtiest task of all. They are obliged to manually remove the excrement of all the higher castes. With tin plates and weed brooms, they collect the feces from open defecation sites, private homes, and dry latrines, a form of toilet where excrements must be scraped through holes and open drainage lines.
जब से मेरी शादी हुई, मेरी सास ने काम करती, गंदी मेला उठाती, तो मेरी सास मेरे को बोली ये काम अपना कर्म है, अपन को करना है, इसलिए तो जब मेरे सास ने बोला तो जब से मैं ये काम कर रही हूँ, मेला उठा रही हूँ.
The impurity of her caste's occupation has dictated every aspect of her life. She cannot physically touch, sit next to, or share the same water source as any other village member who see her as inherently polluted. The bread she collects is the primary source of food for Jamna and her family.
हमारी लड़की शादी होके जाएगी तो करेगी वो तो कैसे वो आगे वो करते हुए सास से करता है तो वो भी करेगी वही करेगी वो तो करेगी वो जागीर के तो काम करेगी वो घर पे बैठी क्या करेगी.
Jamna is not a unique case. She is one of over 1 million manual scavengers who clean the excrements of their villages across India. Generation after generation, this task is passed on through the Valmiki women, who become the breadwinners of their families. In addition to cleaning human excrements, these women are charged with other polluting tasks, including the disposal of dead animal carcasses without any protection, leaving them exposed to diseases and numerous skin infections. Their children also bear the consequences of their mother's dirty work at school, where they are made to sit at the back of the classroom and deemed so polluted that they are not allowed to touch books. Oppressed by their caste and by their gender, these women are particularly targeted for sexual violence and other forms of atrocities, and are forced by their families and their communities to continue this denigrating practice.
अभी गंदी का काम ही सब मरता दिन में बहुत वही काम है, मरेगा जब छूटेगा।
So, friends, this is the story of Jamuna. And this type of Jamunas in India, more than 1 million women, more than 1 million Jamunas are there in India, and they are still do this kind of work like manual screening. Many people said this is an employment or work, but we believe this is not an employment or work. This is a clear-cut caste and gender-based slavery, because all 100% women who are doing this work, they are Dalit, and only 2% male member are involved. So this is not a only caste-based issue, but at the same time, mostly caste and gender-based slavery. In India, many times government said that we are committed to eradicate this practice. Government gives 16 times like the deadlines to the organization like us, that we will eradicate or eliminate this practice from India. And every time they said that we eradicated this practice, but people continue doing this kind of work. Who are involved in this practice, like the Jamuna or other women, they face lots of discrimination and atrocity in their villages. They face lots of discrimination and atrocities in public places, and particularly women who are involved in this manual screening practice, they face lots of discrimination within their houses. Because when women completed this work and come back to home, they face discrimination in their house also. Friends, we say all Dalits are equal, but in the case of manual scavengers, they face discrimination within the Dalit community also. In many places, manual scavengers are not get wages. They only receive left out food, once or 2 times in a year, cloth and some space for their shelter. So in India, we say that for all human beings need 3 very important things like roti, kapda or makan, food, shelter and cloth. So non-Dalit basically provide these kind of 3 basic facilities to the Dalits, and then Dalit do this kind of inhuman slavery. Indian government passed a legislation in 1993 to eradicate manual scavenging practice. But the problem was, can you stop this presentation because this is disturbing for me. Hello? Yeah. So friends, in India, government passed a legislation to eradicate this practice, manual scavenging practice in 1993. But still people doing this work across the country. If you go from Kashmir to Kanyakumari, if you go from south to north, if you go in Uttar Pradesh, where around 10 years, a chief minister who comes from a Dalit community, she ruled, but practices still continue in Uttar Pradesh. Same case in West Bengal, where mostly West Bengal ruled by a party called Communist Party, left party, but still West Bengal is the 2nd largest state where manual scavenging is still prevalent with a higher number. Government of India released the first data of manual scavenger in year 2007. That time they said that 7 lakh manual scavengers are there in the country, and they every day doing this kind of work. Second time they said कि now 4 lakh people are still doing this work. Recently, one government report comes from a Ministry of Social Justice. They said 10,000 people are working as a manual scavenger in our country. But the next day, another report came from the Census Office, and that census called Caste and Economic Census. This census said that 1.8 lakh Dalit doing this work in a rural area. And still they are not released the report from the urban areas. So mostly like this practice exists in urban areas, rural areas, and everywhere in the country. The main issue is many times like we believe that government is responsible. State will deliver some rights or entitlement to the manual scavenger community for their identification, for their liberation and rehabilitation. So government started one program in 1993. That time, Prime Minister P.V. Narasimha Rao passed this law in the Indian Parliament for the eradication of manual scavenging practice. But at the same time, Prime Minister also released and launched a program called Scholarship for the children of engaged in manual scavenging practice. So basically, that scholarship policy says that if your mother or father doing this work for 100 days, then you are eligible to get the benefits of scholarship scheme. But the same year, government said that we'll eradicated this practice through the law, and law passed in Indian Parliament. So this is the contradiction, and not contradiction like the government is not serious or a political will is not there to eradicate this practice in India. Another example, government started the rehabilitation program of manual scavenger community, and then we file a right to information application in the government office how many people you rehabilitate through your rehabilitation program. Then government give a list of 81,000 people. Then we conduct a cross verification of these people how many people actually rehabilitated and how many people get something like the money or another kind of entitlement or support from the government. Then we realize that 74% people, particularly Dalit women who are a manual scavenger, they are in the list of the government, but they not get a single paisa. In some places, the doctors, engineers, some government officials, and the people's representatives, they get benefits of this scheme. They get like the big jeeps, and this scheme called self-rehabilitation of manual scavengers. But through this scheme, government people rehabilitated the doctor and engineers. And the corruption was very high in this whole scheme. In many areas, when we started our program, we liberated the people from this practice. So social boycott is very common thing. Like when women decided I will not do this work, I want to stop this work, then the non-Dalit conduct social and economical boycott against the women. So this practice is very this kind of pressure and the discrimination faced everywhere in the country. But I will not only speak about the problem. I will also want to speak about the solution and our struggle. So friends, in year 2000, we identify around 2,500 women in our area, and that women are doing this kind of work. And then to respond to the whole problem, we started a campaign called Garima Abhiyan, National Campaign for Dignity. And under this campaign, actually we focus on 3 issues. First is identification, because every time government denial, government said no, this practice is not exist in this district or this state. Many times we collect the photographs, we collect video clippings, we submit it to the Supreme Court or the government, but every time they also collect another kind of information and they said no, this practice is not exist. So we conduct an identification process in across country, particularly in 5 states of India. Then we started a campaign for liberation of these women, and we liberated these women through the campaigning at the local level. We organize the meeting, orientation program, discussions. We show the documentary films to the women, and we develop a cadre of community leaders. And these community leaders actually the formal manual scavenger women. Because myself or other people want to convince these women was very difficult. I am also come from a Dalit Muslim community. And some community in the Dalit, in some caste in the Dalit Muslim community, like the Hela and Halal Khor, they are also doing this work. But government of India not provide any legal entitlement or benefit to this community, because they believe, and all people are Dalits, they are all Dalits, but they convert into the Muslim community. That's why they are not eligible to get any benefits or the protection, even protection. They are not covered under SCST Atrocity Prevention Act. They are not covered under the reservation policy. They are not covered any other protection or other provision. So this is the problem of other Dalits also, like the Dalit Muslims. In some states, like Maharashtra, like Madhya Pradesh, like Rajasthan, many thousands of families who come from, they converted into the Islam because they believe if we convert to the Islam, then equality will come. Then people will respect us. They convert their religion, but caste is still with these people. So they convert religion, but they are not able to convert their caste. Or they change their caste.
Ashif, can you draw to a close, please?
2 minutes.
You've well over 2 minutes by now.
Just I will. So friends, we mobilize these women and we liberate, till now we liberated more than 19,000 women in these 5 states. And then we started work for their rehabilitation. Now our struggle is keep government implement the law and policies. 2 campaigns we run in last 3 years. One campaign was called Mela Mukti Yatra, foot march for liberation from night soil. This march we conducted in 200 districts, 18 states, and around 5,000 women travel across the India, and they travel around 10,000 kilometers. And then they convinced to other women, we liberated from this practice, now your term. You also liberate from this practice. So friends, we conduct these kind of activities and we liberated more than 19,000 women. We prepare these women as a barefoot lawyer, they will work for their own rights and rehabilitation. And we also organized one another campaign called Knocking the Door, because government passed the first law in 1993 and that law was not powerful, because that law basically addressed the problem of technical issues, technical problem of the manual screening issue. But manual screening issue is not a technical problem. This is not like a problem of sanitation. Yes, one part is sanitation, but this problem is larger. This problem is related with the human dignity, human rights of the Dalit community, particularly Dalit women. Friends, that act was not powerful, the previous act not powerful. Then we advocate for the new law, and in year 2012 and 13 we started a campaign for the new legislation. We organized one campaign called Knocking the Door, and under the Knocking the Door campaign, around 500 women who liberated from the manual screening practice, they come together and then they started knocking on the doors of Indian parliamentarians. And they knocked the door of 150 Indian parliamentarians and they tried to convince that you need to pass a law to eradicate this practice. In many places, the member of parliament not meet. Then they try to meet their family members, their wife or husband or their children and other family members. And then they shared their whole story. You are the member of parliament from my area, but manual screening practices still exist. They meet with their many political leaders. Because in India, like the political leaders, even in our Prime Minister's constituency, manual screening practices exist.
Ashif.
Yeah. So friends, we organized this whole campaign. We liberated more than 19,000 women and Indian government passed this law. And now still our struggle is going on. And we believe that eradication of manual screening practice is an entry point to challenge the whole caste system. And we are doing the same work. Thank you.